Hello, everyone. Welcome to the transition table. My name is Megan Kearney,
And I'm Dion Hartz-Warsoff.
and today we're going to be talking about trends in the business transaction market.
Yes. So recently, BizBuySell, which is the largest website for business transactions, put out a quarterly report, and we reviewed that report and came away with some very interesting takeaways based on what's been going on in the market. A couple of things is that the beginning of this year, there was a lot of uncertainty. People didn't know where things were going. There was a new presidential administration, and there is still some of that uncertainty, but that has been the biggest issue that businesses have been grappling with, both in the market and just dealing on their own with their business. So there are three main areas. The first one is tariffs and inflation. Till we know exactly how much tariffs are going to be based on where you import from and things like that, it's very, very difficult for businesses to plan on their purchases, properly put together their pricing. Also, they're just grappling with the rising costs, both by continuing inflation and these imposed tariffs. And business owners are saying that customers are more selective. They're spending more cautiously on essentials. They're trying not to spend too much money, and they may be pulling back from discretionary purchases. However, it seems that since the end of June, some of that has abated a little bit. So businesses are delaying hires, they're scaling back on growth plans, all because of uncertainty. The
I think I was going to say, Dion, on that part, it seems like two words that stick out to me is intentionality and fear, almost with not being prepared or the unknown of it all.
Yes. And the other big impact on many, many businesses, and this is whether it's for acquisition or other forms of capital requirements, is the changes to the SBA, Standard Operating Procedures. We call it the SBA SOP. And as a former lender, I read it every time it changes. And now acquisition financing in particular is more difficult to acquire. Big changes for acquisition is there are more limitations on seller financing considered part of a capital infusion, which we actually see as a good thing because we want buyers to have enough cash to at least put down 10% of the price of what they're buying. Otherwise, they're really going to be stretched thin. But some of the other things are that although now you can use an acquisition loan for a partial sale, any seller that remains on as a partner in the acquisition has to personally guarantee the full amount of the loan for the life of the loan, regardless of what percentage they have in the business. And then the other big thing is that ownership for any SBA loan is limited to citizens and green card holders, so permanent residents. So if someone is here on a visa, they can no longer obtain SBA financing to either acquire or grow a business. They're also doing 6-month look backs on ownership in a business. And so that becomes also more difficult for some business owners that have come to the United States to invest here, and something that people need to think about. The other thing as a result of all of this is that it is taking longer for approvals. It is taking longer for closing because there's a lot more investigating going on, even if the bank is an approved SBA lender, because of all the additional requirements. Something to keep in mind if you're going to need capital for any reason and you're looking to the SBA, make sure you understand these things and plan ahead. We talk about planning ahead for exit planning. Now you need to plan ahead for capital infusions or if you need to borrow money. And then what we've seen in the market and what BizBuySell did in their survey is that the trajectory is fairly different among industries. So, first part of the year was fairly slow for most industries as people were trying to figure out what was going on. But now there's more growth in sales, but because of the volatility, the tighter credit, and slower expansion in the economy, some businesses are just proving more resilient because they have consistent demand. So we're seeing less sales of restaurants and more sales of what we like to call the boring businesses, because
Mhm.
regardless of what's going on, these businesses will continue to exist. And it brings me back to when we were going through COVID, businesses that were able to adapt, we called it pivoting back then, really survive well and are good investments. So, what you can do with your business is see what you can do to make yourself resilient and be responsive. And the best way to handle that is be prepared, have a plan in place, have realistic expectations for your business's value, and think about the things you can do now to increase the value even through the uncertainty.
If you're a seller, this market calls for flexibility and realistic expectations, like you were saying. If you're a buyer, there's opportunities out there, especially in resilient sectors like services. But again, financing and strategy matters more than ever.
And finally, for buyers, make sure that you're really qualified, because the people that are on really stretching themselves to buy a business will not get financing. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing declines in loan, like a buyer being declined for a loan because they just don't have the wherewithal. At the end of the day, transparency is key. That's what matters. Make sure you're upfront with yourself and with everybody you interact with to make sure that your business will continue. The economy is not in bad shape, but everybody needs to just be paying attention with what's going on.
Sounds good. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next week on the transition table.